ladies and gentlemen, Jack Benny.
Thank you very, very much, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our show.
I'm Jack Benny, star of stage, screen, radio, and television.
How do you do?
Meeting your idols can be very disconcerting. You hope they don't let you down. And I had a period of working at LC Studios back in the 70s, and a lot of Americans came over who I got to know and worked with. And Jack Benny, who was an absolute idol of mine, played a mean, conceited coward in his act and was the loveliest, warm man to work with.
You get a lot of strange customers around here, don't you?
Aw, you're just self-conscious.
Shall I measure your chest, or would you rather not know?
Now cut that out.
On the stage or on television, Jack Benny could be doing absolutely nothing, but you were watching him. Bob Hope said of Jack Benny, Jack doesn't come onto the stage, he commands it.
To me, a special is when coffee goes from 85 cents to 74.
It's that indefinable magnetism, the charisma that the man had.
What's that sticking out on the side?
That's your ear.
You'll have to excuse me for laughing, but I just spent the most wonderful half hour I've ever spent in my life. I was listening to my own radio show.
Jack Benny became a star on radio in America because of his immaculate timing. And one classic joke he did on the radio, which he subsequently did on television, but I still prefer, and I've heard it, the sound version on radio. He's walking home, and a mugger, a robber, stops him and says,
Hey, Bud. Bud.
Huh?
Got a match?
Match? Yes, I have one right here.
Don't make a move. This is a stick-up.
What?
You heard me.
Mister, put down that gun.
Shut up. Now, come on. Your money or your life?
and there's complete silence, dead air on the radio, utter silence. And the man says,
Look, Bud, I said your money or your life. I'm thinking it over.
That's all it was. It was beautiful. What other comedian would go for a joke with a big stretch of silence in the middle? That was Benny.
Jack, did I hear you say that you had an argument with a cab driver in Toledo?
Yes, but of course that was years ago.
What was the fight all about?
Oh, nothing. He just happened to say something I didn't like, and he hit me. Otherwise, Toledo was lovely.
Jack Benny created radio performing comedy, as we know, but he was the one who understood how the microphone worked. If you're doing a podcast now, in a way, you're only doing that because of the way that Jack Benny understood how to speak directly to the audience through the microphone from radio. The thing about that humor from his time is that written down and read aloud, it doesn't necessarily jump off the page as being the funniest thing you've ever read. But what he was about the relationship between him and everybody who was listening to him. And that's his genius, was his interaction. Even when he isn't interacting, even his silences are a conversation that he's having with the audience.
If you love the girl, go right ahead and propose to her.
Well, I have, but every time I do, she just looks at me and giggles.
Giggles?
And Pa thinks she's an idiot.
Oh, what does your Ma think?
Ma said Pa's a fine one to talk.
It's working up to a first show that makes you so nervous, the anxiety, you worry about what the critics will say, what they'll write about me and everything. Well, anyway, it's over, and now I'm relaxed. you see. The reviews came in, I read them, I burned them, now let's forget it.
He made the transition triumphantly and became a star on American television. But his television show was just something else.
Everybody in town is talking about it.
About me being cheap?
Yes.
Just mention one.
Well, Barbara Stanwyck, Danny Kaye, Gary Cooper.
I only asked for one.
Jack Benny's delivery is very smooth and his patter is very sophisticated, but the character that he creates is someone who is very stingy and very kind of ungenerous and slightly bitter about certain kinds of things.
He developed this persona of being unbelievably mean and stingy, and that became part of his comic shtick. That was a very good idea because it meant that he and his scriptwriters could actually work jokes and gags around the very fact that he was supposed to be unbelievably mean.
Now look, Roger, look, as long as both of us are in the store here, I'd like to buy you your Christmas gift now, you see? Because I don't want to duplicate anything. You see, what did I give you last year?
A brand new dollar bill.
Oh, yeah.
And a lecture on the evils of wine, woman, and song.
Well, that was just a gag, you know. I just did that to make you laugh.
I wish you'd have told me. I cried all night.
He was renowned for making jokes about being stingy. A lot of them are very funny, but it's done very lightly because it became such a thing for so long with him that he would barely have to refer to it, or it could be just sort of lightly thrown in to huge laughs because it was part of his brand.
The character he played, the mean character, got through to me, and I really, really loved that. There was a time when he was in a gondola in Venice, and there was some boys sort of diving over, and he said, why are they diving over?
He says the reason the children are here is because this is the spot where every gondolier throws a coin in the water for good luck, and the children dive for it.
Oh.
Cuts away and then cuts back, and he's not sitting there any longer. And his wife was saying, what you did? And he's standing on the bank saying,
Mary, how could you? Heavens to Betsy. I just came up here to take a picture.
And that was because you knew he was this mean guy.
There you are, $2.
$1.99 out of 2. It will take a few minutes to get your change.
I'll wait.
They seem to have developed in sort of showbiz generally, more in America than here, characteristics that you could keep playing off. He was mean, you know, he wasn't going to part with any money. So that allowed him to make jokes about that and other people to make jokes about him.
You got a... What? Well, that cost over $5,000.
That's right.
But how can you afford a car like that?
Well, after all, Jack, I've been working for you for 20 years. So last week, I went down to the bank, drew out all the savings I had, bought a raffle ticket, and won the car.
Whenever I went to Italy, I kept hearing one phrase all the time. I kept hearing people say to me, quanto può, qualcuno essere tanto turchio. Now, what does that mean?
Mi sì. Quanto può qualcuno essere tanto tirchio, eh? That means, how can a man be so cheap?
Jack Benny was a master of the technique of getting comedy out of a whole moment and not just the lines. And what he seems to have been brilliant at was what's called reaction comedy. When it comes to television, he seems to have realized more and faster than anyone else that your armory of comic techniques is hugely expanded. And what he's brilliant at is just watching things happen around him or reacting to things.
By the time he'd moved from radio into television, he'd mastered the art of the slow double take.
I'm busy tonight.
Busy?
Well, you see, I'm going to a party.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll go with you.
No, you see, Jack, you've got to be invited.
Well, tell the hostess that you're bringing somebody.
I can't very well do that.
Why not?
I'm the one who's giving the party.
There's that ability to let other people get the laughs around you, but this technique he developed he was constantly working whilst other people were doing things, which was just extraordinary to watch and get laugh. And he's waiting for his little moment as well.
He knew he'd get a laugh just when I'd sat with his reaction. Silent reaction on the face. He was superb. One routine I remember that he'd originated in America, he did it with Bob Crosby, Bing's brother, and Jack would start telling a joke, and Bob Crosby would walk on.
He says, 2 weeks ago, another uncle of mine died and left me 5,000 pounds. Now, last week...
Stage manager.
Last week...
Say, I wonder if you'd draw those travelers and bring down my scenery?
Yeah.
Thank you. Say, would you give this music to Mr. Merrick, please? Thank you.
And the audience applauded. Bob Crosby would then sing a number with Benny standing on the stage, just looking at this.
I'm sending you a big bouquet of roses. One for every time you broke my heart.
And then milking the applause, Bob Crosby, and then go off. And then he'd finish the joke. The audience then have to catch up, and to their credit, they did, but not immediately.
Yeah.
So this actor said, last week, my uncle died and left me nothing. That's the end of the joke. Well, here I am again. Of course, this might not mean much to you, but the Prudential Life Insurance Company is thrilled.
Jack Benny was a master of exploiting all the ammunition that television gives you, because television eats material. Vaudeville comics would have had an act, and they would have done the same act every night. Suddenly, they have to do television. They have to do a show a week, you know, half-hour or an hour-long show a week. And clearly, to keep the quality up, you need to work out how to milk every ounce of laughs out of every moment. What's amazing when you watch him is how he does that. He will do routines that are very simple, superficially. There's a sequence, for example, in one of his shows, one of his slightly later shows from the 60s, where at the beginning, he appears to be walking towards the camera. And he doesn't do anything. He just does this comedy walking towards the camera that doesn't end.
Boy, what a ham. I've seen long entrances, but this is ridiculous.
This intro goes on for 2 or 3 minutes with the announcer waiting to start the show, and they cut back to Jack Benny, who's just walking towards the camera like this. And you get to the first commercial break, and he hasn't said a word. And he's already got loads of laughs, and he's done absolutely nothing. And it's a tremendous skill, I think.
What's taking him so long?
Well, I don't know. I think he stopped to make a night deposit.
Initially, his television show, and Eric and Ernie learned from this, was done on a stage in front of the audience with the curtains and everything, and guests would walk on the stage and be greeted. But then it evolved into a sitcom where he was at home with his mate Rochester, Eddie Rochester, and people would come calling. And this was a breakthrough, a star comedian doing his show that had become a sitcom. He was a trailblazer, Jack.
Rochester.
Oh, hello, boss.
You've been sitting here all the time?
Uh-huh.
With the phone, didn't you hear the phone?
Uh-huh.
Well, why didn't you answer it?
This is my day off.
Do you think in a way, he was a forerunner for the current sitcoms that we get on the TV?
Well, I don't know whether he was the first, but I bet he was one of the first.
And Rochester, there was a sort of black guy.
Well, that full credit
Yeah.
to have your black mate on there on a mainstream television show. I thought that was great.
And also, although he's playing a valet, he always gets the better of Jack Benny.
Oh, there was no...
He's equal, isn't he, really?
There was no condescension at all. He was always topping Jack Benny. It was marvellous.
Yeah, I'm glad you stayed home. You know, I don't even know where the eggs are.
You'll find them in the refrigerator.
Oh, all right. I'm gonna fix myself a cheese omelet or something.
One of the things that slightly annoys me about the history of American television is people talk a lot about the first interracial screen kiss in Star Trek. But what Jack Benny did was much, much further back than that, and he did something much, much more radical compared to what was going on at the time, in that he cast a black actor as an equal. Prior to this, white actors would black up to play black characters. We now see that as grotesque, but it was Jack Benny who stopped that happening. So, in a way, Rochester is his employee, but not really, because Rochester's always getting one over on him. He's always smarter than him. He knows the answer. And so he's a complete equal.
Rochester, what are you doing?
I'm setting the clock back to 5:40. Didn't have a headache then.
Listen, will you cut that out?
He made sure that Rochester always got the better of him. That wonderful sort of raspy voice, you know, it was just hugely funny. But Rochester was really one of those people who was kind of the power behind the throne. You know, he knew he was actually the one who was in control.
Other characters start to come in later on. There are other black characters who come on. He was very active in that regard, but he never let that interfere with the comedy. So he wouldn't do it in a tokenistic way. Everyone had to be part of the comedy, and everyone had to be an integral cog. And if you like, that's the genius moment of Jack Benny, is when he realizes how to integrate everything and to allow people to be whoever they are as long as they're funny.
What'd you get at the market, Rochester?
Food for the week.
Yeah.
Butter, bread, meat, and the usual supply of canned goods.
Mm-hmm.
But I think next week I'm going to have to shop at a different market.
Why? What's wrong with our regular market?
Well, you know how they always charge less for cans that are bent?
Yeah?
Well, this morning they caught me bending them.
George Burns, of course, George is the closest friend that I have in show business. We've been friends for, many, many years. As far back as I can remember. And George is a wonderful fellow. I mean, he's so modest. He's never let the fact that he's a close friend of such a big star go to his head.
Jack Benny and George Burns were contemporaries and were always being rude about each other. But they were great friends, really, which I suppose everybody sort of understood. But it was like a sort of running, it's like a sort of 50-year-long situation comedy / panel game where people could make jokes and be rude about each other. Insult comedy is very big in America, and so just keep coming back to the same old thing. But they actually were very, very attached to each other.
Look, Jack, you're no pleasure to play with either. I was plenty embarrassed when you got into that big argument with the man on the other fairway about whose ball it was. It was my ball. He said it was his ball. I said it was mine, and you had no reason to agree with him. I had to. Father Donovan is an honest man.
They thought the same way. They weren't rivals in any way. They were friendly. At least that's what I can gather.
You know, Bing, I was thinking, you never hit the big time until you met Paul Whiteman and he took you to the Coconut Grove.
Yeah, and George never hit the big time really till he met Gracie and took her to the Justice of the Peace.
I got a funny answer for that, but I'm going to save it to my own show.
I always thought, watching Jack Benny with this relaxed, slow style, never rushing anything, and I thought, you can't have been like that when you were a young comedian. It wouldn't have worked. And I found out that many years back in vaudeville or whatever in America, he was on a bill with the Marx Brothers, who did a big, noisy, knockabout sketch full of noise and fun, and he had to follow that. And his instinct was, I'll be different. I'll be quiet and slow. And he'd been doing that for years, maturing and refining that wonderful style. He never rushed anything. The audience were happy to wait and go with him.
I hope you all had a wonderful time last night. Incidentally, those of you who are seeing this show in color, I would suggest that you take another cold shower because we're only on in black and white.
Jack Benny grew up in Chicago. He was a young musician, he was a violin player, and he got onto a sort of an early vaudeville circuit. He began to become what we would now recognize as a stand-up, and he played a particular circuit which was part vaudeville, but also part Catskills Mountains. And the Catskills Mountains was where a lot of New York Jewish families would go to summer. And every Saturday night, there'd be these big entertainers who would come in from New York and entertain all evening, but they'd have to play to a big audience. They'd have to make it work for everybody. This is how Jack Benny forged his, not just his comedy and his style, but also his respect and relationship with the audience.
Mary, tonight we have Humphrey Bogart as our guest star. And really, I'm getting him fairly reasonably. You know how tough he is on the screen? You know what a tough guy knows nothing about business.
He sort of rose up in an era when comedy was generally very fast-talking. Fast-talking one-liners, you know. And it's like he looked round and thought, how can I be a bit different to everybody else? And what can I do that will make me different without trying to look weird or trying to look like I'm trying too hard?
Oh, I must tell you, first of all, what the orchestra boys gave me. You see, they always wait the last minute to buy me a gift. And this year, they tried to get it on Christmas Eve. You see, and the only thing open was a delicatessen. So the next morning when I came downstairs, there, hanging on the mantel, was a stocking full of coleslaw.
Jack Benny, first time he entered the room at L Street, there was a whole crowd of us, and he was introduced to us all. From that day on, he never forgot anybody's name. I have to confess, I got a little thrill, a little tremor every time he said, "What do you think, Barry?" Remembered your name, remembered everybody's name. It's not trivial, that, and he was a big star. But a taxi driver told me once he was a lovely tipper. He didn't live up to his image at all. The first line I think I ever wrote for him, and to hear Jack Benny speaking a line you wrote. I'm staying in a hotel in London. It's absolutely delightful and nothing's too much trouble. I rang down for room service and they sent up a priest.
The Jack Benny character is very stingy, but Jack Benny as a performer and as a person was hugely generous, huge philanthropist, always giving other people routines and giving other people jokes and giving other people the funny line. He was the, you know, he played the opposite of himself in a way.
He once said that what matters is that the show's funny. It's not about how funny I am, it's about how funny the show is. He made sure that the supporting characters in his shows were funny in their own right. And that makes the whole show funnier, and also, as he clearly knew, it reflects on him.
The other thing about Jack Benny's generosity is that he always credited his writers. So he would write some of his material, but he also had good writers. And at that time, a lot of comedians would not credit their writers. They would allow the audience to assume, and indeed specifically avoid mentioning them, because they wanted to take the credit for the funny. But when Jack Benny had a good joke written by someone, he'd thank that person. He made it public that these people are good and they write for me. And writers loved that. They felt that they felt that he was loyal to them, and therefore they were loyal to him.
Hi, Dennis.
Oh, hello, Mr. Benny.
Hi, you doing your Christmas shopping, eh?
Yeah, I was just going to buy you a gift, and you had to walk up and spoil the whole thing.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know you were buying me a gift.
Now you'll have to close your eyes.
All right. Like this?
Okay, mister, you can wrap it up now. And put it in a shoebox so you won't know it's a shirt.
He's not seeking to be number one all the time.
No.
That's the key for him is not to go, I have to be one grabbing all the lines. Give me that. I want to be. But he'll just let it all go on.
He loved other people getting laughs, but I think quietly he knew I'll get quite a good laugh with my reaction. We rehearsed a sketch with Des O'Connor we'd written, and we're just reading it through, and very politely and quietly now and again, Jack Benny would say, "Oh, do you think we could just tweak that a bit? I tell you what, Des says that." And then we recorded it. It was a pre-record, and it really worked. But Des O'Connor said to me, "I've been taken to the cleaners by a master, and I don't care. Nobody be looking at me in that sketch." He was a lovely guy, Benny. I mean, he played this mean, conceited coward, but what a warm, friendly man.
Well, I'd like to see something nice in silk lingerie.
Certainly. What size do you wear?
This shirt is not only smart looking, but it's also guaranteed. What size do you wear, please?
Well, it's been so long since I bought a shirt, I forgot the size.
Well, it's easy enough to find out. The size is marked on the inside of the collar. Turn around, please.
Yes.
Jack Benny appeared in a film with Carol Lombard and other good people, directed by a wonderful director called Ernst Lubitsch. And the film was called To Be or Not to Be, a very dry, witty comedy on a serious subject, the German invasion of Poland.
Oh, flowers, eh?
Aren't they beautiful?
Don't be casual. Who sent them?
I don't know. There wasn't any card.
No card again? That's 3 nights in succession. Who is he?
I'm sure this has nothing to do with me personally. This man is probably a lover of the theater, an art fanatic, someone sitting up in the gallery night after night.
Oh, just one of those poor boys who hasn't the price of a ticket, but inherited a lot of flowers and is trying to get rid of them. 3 nights in a row. Even Shakespeare couldn't stand seeing Hamlet 3 nights in succession.
You forget you're playing Hamlet.
Oh, that's right.
To Be or Not to Be is a really good film. It was made in 1942, right in the middle of the war, and it's really quite head-on. It's about a theatre troupe in occupied Poland.
To Be or Not to Be is Jack Benny's, in a sense, it's his anti-Nazi picture. It's about a theatre company who are about to perform a parody of the Third Reich and somehow get intertwined with the turning up of Hitler himself, who then they have to substitute their own performer who's playing Hitler. It's very funny, but it's very dark. A lot of the comedy comes from the way that Nazis salute each other, which is, you know, it would be very difficult to do now, and Nazis being bored, and so it's a very, in a way, it's the comedy that Mel Brooks Mel Brooks, who remade the film in 1983, and who, with Springtime for Hitler, and the producers, it's that comedy, and that's where it begins in 1942.
You know, you're quite famous in London, Colonel. They call you Concentration Camp Earhart.
Yes, yes. We do the concentrating and the Poles do the camping.
It is one of the most sophisticated comedies of its period. Didn't do very well at the time because, of course, it was all very sensitive, but is now regarded quite rightly as a comedy classic. Benny is amazing in it. The underlying seriousness of the film, I mean, you know, let's not forget, Jack Benny was Jewish, is there. It's just a very, very powerful film, but of course it's made funny.
As soon as you're in his room, you hit him over the head with the butt of the gun. All right. Then you take his keys, open his trunk, and burn the papers. And then you shoot him. All right. Just a minute. What'll happen to me? They'll kill me. Well, we're going to keep our fingers crossed. Good. Hey, wait a minute. You go to the hotel and I'll cross my fingers. Here, think of something else.
It's a really brave film. In a way, that film is the peak of his movie career. After that, he's much more known for television, which he was a sort of a master of.
What was the lady's name? Mrs. Tura. Her husband is that great, great Polish actor, Joseph Tura. You've probably heard of him.
Oh, yes. As a matter of fact, I saw him on the stage when I was in Warsaw once before the war.
Really?
What he did to Shakespeare, we are doing now to Poland.
This is what they were waiting for, huh? Okay. All right. Hey, let's do it. Give me A, will you, please?
All right.
Good.
There are various aspects of Jack Benny's character. They seem to have been that become almost comedy standards because you kind of recognise them. He played a musical instrument, but deliberately badly. He could actually play the violin quite well, but he pretended to play it badly, which of course rings immediate bells for British audiences of certain other comedians who pretended to play things or do things badly.
He'd actually wanted to be a musician and he'd had training as a violinist. It just so happened that when he was performing sometimes and he hit a bum note or something didn't go quite right, he would have to make some comment or a joke about it and discovered that he could actually get laughs. He realized he was never going to be a concert violinist, but he incorporated an act that combined music and comedy. And that's how it started. That's how his whole comic persona originated.
So you had this sort of plot line in doing this, that he's actually trying to play the violin, but of course never really gets there because he's only an okay violinist or he's a good comedian.
Jack, will you put that thing away and sit down?
Mary, it isn't often that we have company, you know.
Mr. Benny, why don't you sit down and eat before the food gets cold?
No, I'd rather play.
He was a violinist to start with. Is that part of his act, violin?
Yes, he had the violin. Oh, he told me the story. He said he once walked on in front of the studio audience with his violin and he'd forgotten the bow. He left the bow in the dressing room and went like that, and it got a laugh. And the director said to him afterwards, "Oh, that was funny, Jack." And Jack Benny said, "No, it wasn't. It was real, and I don't think that was funny at all." And one of the cameramen said, "You're wrong, Jack. It's funny."
Yeah.
And Jack Benny said, "I've been doing it ever since."
Well, you see, I feel that deep down inside of you is a great musical talent, but you just haven't surrounded yourself with the proper atmosphere.
You may be right. Now, what did you do with that gun?
Now, wait a minute before you start any rough stuff. I'm entitled to one phone call, ain't I?
Well, yes.
Okay, give me a dime and I'll run down to the drugstore.
Oh, no, you don't. You'll make that phone call right here where I can keep my eye on you.
Yeah, and save a dime.
Yeah.
The Jack Benny show began to become hugely successful and had a huge number of very successful cameos. And in the same way that Curb Your Enthusiasm these days places someone in real relationship to real stars, that really Jack Benny began. So there's a very famous episode with James Stewart, and what's happening is James Stewart is hosting a dinner, and it's something that he does every year. And he really doesn't want Jack Benny to come because he finds him a pain in the arse, he finds him stingy, he finds him irritating. So the first part is how James Stewart is trying to avoid getting Jack Benny to come and the tricks he plays.
I met Jack on the street, and in the course of the conversation, he asked how you were. And instead of just saying fine and letting it go at that, I just happened to mention that we were going to celebrate our wedding anniversary tonight. And then Jack just started suggesting that he join us. And before I could say no, he grabbed me by the lapel.
Why didn't you just walk away?
I did, and dragged him 2 blocks.
And then that doesn't work. Jack Benny turns up with his girlfriend, who is a very New York kind of telephone operator. But Jack Benny doesn't want them to know that she's a telephonist and that's how he gets to speak to people at the TV network, is because his girlfriend's on the switchboard.
Mildred works at CBS.
Oh, she's in television.
Well, you see,
Well, no, not exactly.
What are you hemming and hawing about? I'm a telephone operator, and I'm proud of it.
Look, Mildred,
If it wasn't for me, you wouldn't be able to talk to those other big shots.
Mildred, please.
All right. The truth hurts, don't it?
Jimmy Stewart delivers it beautifully. It's kind of, he's playing Jimmy Stewart, but he's got a really sharp, self-deprecating comic timing, but also a very interesting cruel streak in that he is quite cruel to Jack Benny.
If you two will excuse us, Gloria and I are going to dance.
Jimmy, the orchestra isn't playing.
I want to pay back that $100 I borrowed from you 2 weeks ago.
Oh, Don, you didn't have to make a trip just for that.
No, Jack, I want you to have it. I'll feel better about it.
Well, it's silly just to make a trip just for that.
But I remember one sketch, and Raymond Burke was on, and I remember him as Ironside, and so my entire youth is thinking this man can't walk. But he comes on, and Raymond Burr wants to be a stand-up, and so he says, off you go, do your thing. And then he says, stops him, he starts a joke, waits till he's just about to do the punchline, and then stops him and says,
You see, your entrance for a comedian, your entrance was much too formal. See, too stiff.
What do you mean?
Well, you can't walk out so serious. Let me, like, for instance, I walk out like a comedian. I'll show you what I mean. So, could I have my introduction, please? Just one, please.
he shows him the kind of way he walks on, with a bit of fun to it or whatever. And then Raymond Burr says, I'll give it a go. And then amazingly, out of nowhere, Raymond Burr does this incredible, almost routine, like a silly walk, spins round, does everything.
Oh, pardon me, mister, but did my man come over and put some of my clothes in your luggage? See?
Mel Blanc was the voice of Bugs Bunny and an absolutely brilliant vocal talent. And he was a regular on Jack Benny's TV show.
The sea routine is a scene that doesn't work when I tell it to you, but I urge you to see it. So what happens is they're at an airport, and somehow Jack Benny's luggage has wound up in the suitcase of this Mexican guy. And he talks to the Mexican guy, and it's his reactions really, because he's saying, I gather that some of my clothes in your case. And the person says, si. And it goes on like that, si, si. Answer, are you going to New York, did he?
Are you going to New York? Si. Are you taking flight 18? Si. What's your name? Sai.
Okay, why is that funny? It's because of the way Jack Benny is responding to this. The way he's trying to think of what the next question is, and the way he, at one point he says, yeah, I don't know how you're going to react to this question, and he goes back to him.
My man told me you were going to visit some relatives in New York. Si. A sister, is it? Si. I'm afraid to ask this next one. What's her name? Sue?
It's another example of how he will let a performer, because Mel Blanc is a brilliant performer, these amazing voices, and he will let him take over a sketch and react to him and kind of play along. It's still really funny now because it's two people that are masters of different comic skills, but working together.
Well, look, Sue, or see.
They were filming the Sunshine Boys, and Jack had been cast in it. And then we lost him. Jack died. And they replaced him. They asked George Burns, his great friend, to replace him. And George, out of respect, declined. He didn't want to. Mary, Jack's wife, insisted. So George played the part in the film The Sunshine Boys and won an Oscar. He hadn't been in a film for 30 years, accepted his Oscar and said, I'll see you in 30 years' time, and walked off.
That relaunched George Burns. It made him a movie star. He ended up in a series of Hollywood films after that. That was, if you like, the final gift he gave George Burns was a brand new career.
Where have you been all my life?
avoiding it.
Jack Benny had a very long career in the development of comedy. He was taking the transition between vaudeville, radio, television, stand-up comedy and situation comedy, because there was a world going on in his act.
They have me singing Christmas songs. Here? I can't live on what you pay me.
Jack Benny's sense of timing made him unique. I think it was because he wasn't actually a teller of jokes. What he was a creator of a comic environment that made you laugh. He was just a prime example of a comic who realized that reaction is possibly more powerful than actual action. And he was a complete master of that.
No food. What was in the refrigerator?
A disappointed mouse.
How a man can have that much money and be so calm, I'll never understand.
He just seems to have mastered a whole gallery of comic techniques. Because as he himself said, he doesn't really tell jokes. I guess you feel that he's not too showbiz, weirdly, even though he is. He seems like quite a normal guy. And I think television really loves that quality.
Jewelry department?
Yeah.
Right over there.
Good night, folks. See you soon.
When the student revolution occurred in Paris in 1968, the graffiti in the streets read, "I am a Marxist of the Groucho variety." Barry Cryer pays homage to the Marx Brothers, our comedy legends, on Wednesday at 9 on Sky Arts.